for asking me today and giving me this opportunity. I just basically just do a short outline of this afternoon's presentation, just to say, firstly, give the basics and the background to the story, then read an extract, and then give something of how the book came about, followed by another extract, and then I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Well, the Carved Angel is a story that begins around 1910, and it's just before the First World War in a coal mining village on the North Yorkshire Durham border, and its hero, if you like, is Tommy Wagstaff, who's a youngster by then. He was born around 1900, and he, like his father, works down the coal mine, and the story itself follows Tommy going down to his first initial employment in the coal mine, and then, of course, when war comes in 1914, Tommy's getting older, and the country basically goes to war and if you probably remember, in 1916, at the Somme, there's then comes conscription, but Tommy volunteers before that. Tommy goes to war. He takes, like many did in those days, joined up his local regiment with a lot of friends. This had a double-edged sword, if you like, because unfortunately for many, sometimes whole communities were wiped out in one day. So Tommy goes to Flanders. He sees his best friend, Bert Dyson, die, and he loses his mind with all the carnage. If you can imagine a youngster coming from, well, anywhere really, and from just a local village that they know, and suddenly they're thrust into this hell. And Tommy loses his mind a little, and the only way that he can sort of get back and feel like he's doing anything and making a positive contribution is to bury his dead comrades. And having seen Bert die, that's what he did. He collected the remains of Bert and he buried him, and from that he started to dig and bury his friends, and obviously there was a lot of work for him to do. The book goes on to the end of the war, where he comes out and comes back home, and like a lot of soldiers, they're feeling very, very lost, trying to adapt to civilian life and still coming to terms with what they've seen. And Tommy takes a job as a grave digger because it's the only job that he feels he's capable. He doesn't want to go down to the mines again. He doesn't want to be with people that a place where it reminds me the friends that he's lost, or trying to explain that people who weren't there. And he becomes a grave digger, and eventually the story becomes the grave digging through, I can only explain as a religious experience. He gets some sort of catharsis and some sort of release through seeing a miracle and then realizing and putting his life into perspective. So I'd like to start now by a short extract, and this is where his father, Da, who is a coal miner, he like many men then, their entertainment was that money was scarce and it was difficult trying to feed the family. And his uh, simple entertainment was whittling carved figures, from which he made a little angel. And this angel was a present to uh, became a present to Tommy, because Tommy was just about to go down to the mines. He just started in the screens, which is a sort of sorting shed where they graded the coal. And then, like many young boys, 14, 15, when they left school, they would go into the screens and then down into the mine itself. And Dad very thoughtfully carved this little angel to give Tommy some protection, is a token of protection. So this is when Tommy is given that little carved angel, and the carved angel is of Saint Barbara, who is the patron saint of coal miners. Dad would never let anyone see his carving until he had finished it, although little Emma had sneaked a look and was most impressed. With her 11th birthday only a few days away, she was hoping that Dad's latest figurine was for her. Dad sat with his back to the children and whittled away, only stopping now and again when a bout of his hacking cough took hold and he would rasp his throat before disgorging the resulting contents into a spittoon, but always away from the children. Once he was satisfied with his secret carving, he smiled at Ma. He wrapped it up in a little cloth and for the rest of the evening proceeded to rub the figurine until he was satisfied that all its surfaces were smooth. Dad then took out his special pot of linseed oil, which he had traded with Jimmy Furman, the pit's master carpenter, for one of his homing pigeons. He then rubbed the precious oil into the carved pine to let it soak into its pores. Once it was finished, Ma and Dad went outside for a bit of Ma and Dad time, as they called it, while the children entertained themselves in the parlour. The parents soon returned, and immediately silence. Tommy, said Ma, we have a little present for you, since you start down the pit tomorrow. And with that, she unwrapped from the oil-stained rag a shiny carved wooden angel, complete with feathered wings and holding its arms out in a protective embrace. Oh, it's so beautiful, cooed little Emma, but with more than a hint of disappointment in her young voice. Ma sensed her sadness. Now, Emma, she said, I know you had your eye on Dad's carving, but don't you fret, lass. Dad's promised to make you one too, and later on for Edward and Victor, haven't you, Dad? Dad nodded. This one, specially for our Tommy, to protect him wherever he goes, and particularly down the pits. This angel represents Saint Barbara, the patron saint of miners. Now, you want your brother to be safe and under her protection down there, don't you, Emma? Asked Ma. Emma smiled. Of course I do, Ma, she said, and she took it from her and passed the angel to Tommy. You take it, Tommy, said Emma. Look after the angel, and the angel will look after you. I know it will. And with that, she wrapped her arms around her big brother's waist and gave him a hug. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Ma, said Tommy, not without a little embarrassment in front of Victor and Edward, his brothers. Thanks, Emma. I'll look after it, I promise. And with that, he sat down and stared at the little figurine for a while before putting it in his pocket. Although he never said it at the time, he didn't have the same confidence as Ma and Emma over the powers of the little carved angel, which to him was just a piece of sharp shapen wood discarded from a pit prop. However, Tommy knew he would treasure it as long as he lived, because it was made lovingly by his dad, blessed by his ma, and given to him by his little sis. And from that moment, wherever he went, so did the little pine angel. The Carved Angel book started in around 2004, I think, and I was working in Falmouth, and I decided to go to a creative workshop, writing workshop in the evening, and the lecturer came round and he gave the group various objects he put onto the table, and he said, select one and write a couple pages of foolscap about it, and then we'll read out the results. And amongst the objects, there were, I can't remember all the objects now, but there was a little, about 4 inches long, a Cornish shovel, and it intrigued me, and I thought, well, what can I write about a shovel? And I thought, well, who would use a shovel? And my first thought was, well, probably a miner. And I've always been admired miners for working in such claustrophobic, dirty, and so dangerous places, and with everything getting into their lungs, and their short lives for many. And my grandfather was a tin miner in the Tamar Valley, so that had some influence. And I also thought, who else would use it? And then I thought, a soldier. I thought of the trenches, and so immediately I thought of a soldier digging a trench. And then I also felt this. I've always been interested in the First World War, so another influence on me was I studied at college in Leeds in North Yorkshire, and I was there 4 years, and my impression of Northern people and their openness and their integrity and their friendliness and their hardiness left an impression. So I brought all these factors together, and I wrote my 2 pages, and I didn't think much about it. And then I thought, well, maybe this story is a bit too good to let go. And from that 2 pages became 4 pages of A4. And then I put it in a drawer, and I got made redundant from my job in Falmouth, and I returned to Plymouth, and I was fortunate. I managed to get a job in working on a paper in Tavistock, and I became friends with a great friend of mine, Ted Sherrill, who worked at the paper, and he is in his 70s. He had written quite a few books himself, mainly about the Tamar Valley, and he's got from a farming background. And when I found out he was interested in books, we talked, and I told him about my short story, and I showed it to him, and he said he read it, and he said, "Well, yeah, this is a lovely story, and it's got possibilities. You should write more." And that's it. It became. I didn't know. Certainly didn't have a beginning, middle, and end when I started, but I found that um, I began to question myself. I gave Tommy some sort of time frame of when he was born, when he first started down the mines, and I got some background from books that I read from the internet, and I was particularly taken by the Beamish Museum in, I think it's Durham or Northumbria, one of those. But it's, in fact, the Beamish Museum is, you might see it on some of the Catherine Cookson stories on TV, where it's a sort of village where full of shops, and there's a mine, and there's trams, and it's a great place for Edwardian life from scenes from there. So all this, I sort of got it into my mind, and I then found my beginning, my middle, my end, and I thought I'll take Tommy to war, and I then created a best friend for him. And very sadly, they both went to war. Bert Dyson, he in fact saved Tommy's life when he was down the mine, but Bert got killed, and this was a spark really for Tommy to lose his mind when Bert got killed, which is quite an understandable thing. I always try to put myself in the shoes of Tommy, and then the book grew and grew, chapter upon chapter. Then I thought it would be nice to illustrate the book, because when I was working at the Falmouth Packet, a friend of mine, Jane Andrew, it was a strange story really, because I never saw any of Jane's drawings, but I knew Jane and I knew her character, and I knew that a colleague of ours said that Jane's got really good at drawing. It's a real shame that her drawings aren't shown. And I never saw anything from her, but I rang her up one day and I said, "Look, would you be interested in reading my book and maybe do some drawings if you're inspired by it?" And she agreed. And I think you agree that what you see on your screen today, that Jane's not a trained artist, but I think she did a superb job. And I'm really glad that I made that decision to add some illustrations to a book. And it was a book that I wanted to appeal to all ages as well. So I think that helped. And through Ted, I thought about when the book was finished, and obviously when you've got a book in your hand, you don't really want to put it in a drawer and forget about it. You want people to read it and judge for themselves and whether it's good or bad. Because if you don't, you're not going to learn from that process. So I was determined to publish it, but publishing is such a hard game, and it's true. I think it's who you know. We all can't be J.K. Rowling's, and it happened to fall on the right desk at the right time. And literally, if you think about it, there may be the 100 publishers out there who could publish The Carved Angel. It might take years before actually landing on somebody's desk, and I wanted it published. I started in 2004, and it wasn't published until 2014. So that just shows how long it's taken. So Ted told me about his publisher in Penzance, called United Writers, and it's run by a chap called Malcolm Shepherd, and his father started it 50 years ago. Well, Ted Sherrill has been with them for 40 years, and he said they're excellent. And although I paid for it to be published, I've got no regrets, because I think what they produced was a wonderful job. And as I said, the chances of me getting published by one of the big or medium publishers are like buying a lottery ticket, I think. So it came out in 2014, and I was very fortunate when Owen asked me if I would like to bring it to the Athenaeum as my launch, to have a little launching ceremony, which many of you were kind enough to be at. So that's enough, I think, of the background. I will give you a second reading, and I just keeping with the Carved Angel theme, because this second extract is where the war is just coming to an end, and Tommy is now become a gravedigger on the Flanders field, and helping to bury the many dead bodies. And he's one of many British soldiers, but they've got some help, some forced help of German prisoners of war. And this German prisoner becomes under Tommy's command, if you like, to help him bury the dead. And I thought it would be nice to try and look at the war from a German point of view, as well as an Allied point of view, because at the end of the day, I try and find some humanity in all this carnage. So I'd just like to read, if you don't mind, just a small piece from when Tommy. I must explain at this stage, Tommy has just lost another of his friends, Wally Smethwick, who was down the mine with him. And this is after losing Bert, to lose Wally. This has really disturbed him, and he's sort of sitting down in despair. So I'll just read this. Tommy instinctively reached inside the top pocket of his tunic and took out his little carved angel. He looked at the figurine and remembered the time his friend Wally had rescued it from the mine after that deadly explosion in the Hillthorpe pit that seemed now so many years ago. The same Wally who had tended his wounds and helped him to the service and into the arms of his beloved Ma. He lifted up the little angel a few inches from his eyes before offering a little prayer for Wally. Tears once more welled up in him, and as it rained, the water poured on the little angel, and for a moment it too appeared as if it were weeping, just like Tommy, at all the pain and agony that only death can bring. As Tommy sat there clutching his precious child and praying for the end to all this grief, he felt only despair. In his anguish, the disconsolate soldier felt that nobody was listening to his pleas, especially any loving and protective higher power. It was then, looking down towards the ground, he saw a pair of boots in front of him, and he felt a big hand touch his shoulder. He lifted his head to see who the brown leather boots belonged to, and as he did so, he saw Siegfried's face, full of compassion, understanding, and fraternal love for his suffering English comrade. He too knew the loss of a close friend in his ghastly Krieg. Siegfried bent down onto his haunches so he could look the sitting Tommy in the eye, and as he did so, he took out something from his trench coat pocket. A family photograph, thought Tommy. No, there was no photograph, but there instead, in front of Tommy, was unmistakably, if slightly rounder in the face and with a larger set of wings, another little carved angel made of pine. Santa Barbara? Yeah, said Siegfried with a smile, and as Tommy looked up in wonderment, he heard the German utter something like, Mein Mutter und Vater gab es für mich. Yes, Tommy added. Tommy nodded. St. Barbara. And they held up their little carved angels. And the Englishman wiped away his tears, and they both laughed. I think really I will take your questions now, if that's okay, because I think I've talked about the process of the book coming about as well. So, Owen, if that's okay, if people like to ask some questions, unless you, Owen, you'd like to go to the next picture, which is the poppy one, if that's possible. I'll explain this one actually. I'm glad you. Yeah, if you go back, please, to Owen, to the soldiers. Thank you. That's a lovely drawing. This is Tommy and Bert, and they're so hungry. This is them at their army training camp, and they are so hungry because the quartermaster of the army training camp stole many of the troops' rations, and they were selling it off to make a profit. So it meant that many of the soldiers went without their rations. And this actually is based on a true story, because that happened to my grandfather. My grandfather, who was from Beer Austin, and when he went, he was called up, went into the army, and I think it was the Brecon Beacons in Wales, and him and his soldiers and his fellow soldiers were starving because their sergeant, the one responsible for their care, stole so much that they were in such a poor state. And if you imagine training outside under cold, in the cold and the wet and laying on damp ground, my grandfather ended up with TB, and he went to, he never reached the trenches because, and maybe that saved his life, because he ended up in a TB sanatorium outside Bristol. And in fact, he had stomach ulcers for the rest of his life, and died of stomach cancer in 1968. But so that picture is, it's got a great deal of element of truth, and some of the little stories, vignettes, if you want to call them, in the Carved Angels is taken from little true stories that I think help illustrate. Okay, Owen, thank you. Could you go on to the poppies, please? Thank you. Now, that at the end of the war, Tommy, who's now lost in his when he was in France and Belgium, buried his comrades, and when he came back, he totally lost his mind. He went back home. He couldn't come to terms with life again. He lost his family. Sadly, Ma and Da died from the Spanish flu, which was very prevalent at the time, 1919, I think. And he wandered the countryside as a tramp, and eventually he managed to get a job when he was found by a friendly sergeant who knew him and recognised him, and he took him in. And he got a job as a grave digger, which was ideal for Tommy, because he didn't have to think. But every grave that he dug, he thought of his comrades. And in the end, well, I'm sure that all of you, most of you know the ending, but Tommy sees a vision, and he sees in the churchyard his dead comrades and his beloved Ma and Da, and behind them is the Carved Angel, who's followed Tommy throughout all his troubles. And the final miracle is when he can't believe that he's seen these figures, and they disappear in front of his eyes. Then it pours down with rain, and he sees a big rainbow, and then all the in the graveyard itself, all the poppies come out to full bloom in front of his eyes, representing obviously all the dead people. But it comes with such extreme beauty that it gives, and this is unashamedly sort of a religious connotation, but that of hope, and that, that we we, under God's power, that we will see our loved ones again. So, that is the ending of Card Angel 1. There may be a Card Angel 2 to see what happens to Tommy, but I'm working on that. So anyway, I went back to you, and if people want to